I never thought a Christmas dinner could change my life so drastically, but here I am, Anita, 28 years old, still trying to process what happened that evening. The whole thing started normally enough. I arrived at my parents' house, carrying a bottle of wine and homemade apple pie, just like I always did for family gatherings. The house was already full of relatives when I got there. The biggest surprise was that my younger sister Linda actually showed up. She usually skips these family things, always complaining that there are a lot of old people who talk about their illnesses. When we finally sat down to eat, everything seemed perfectly normal. Dad carved the turkey, Mom passed around her famous cranberry sauce, and Uncle Bob was already on his second glass of wine. The dining room was warm and cozy, with Christmas lights twinkling in the windows and the smell of cinnamon and pine needles in the air. Then Mom cleared her throat and turned to Linda with this weird smile I'd never seen before. "Linda, sweetie, why don't you tell everyone about that business you want to open?" I was in the middle of taking a bite of turkey when Linda started talking, her voice full of excitement I'd never heard from her before. "Oh my God, yes. So, I've got this amazing plan. I'm going to buy clothes from China, super cheap, really good quality stuff, and sell them here for a nice profit." I nearly dropped my fork. Linda? Starting a business? My sister, who hadn't worked a single day since graduating college 2 years ago. Who spent most of her time finding herself and posting selfies on Instagram? But before I could even process this information, the whole family erupted in cheers and congratulations. Uncle Bob raised his glass to our future successful businesswoman. Aunt Martha was going on about how she always knew Linda had it in her, and my cousins were already asking for family discounts. Then I saw Mom and Dad exchange that look, that particular parent look that means they're up to something. I'd seen it many times growing up, usually right before they announced something that would somehow benefit Linda at my expense. "Anita," Mom said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "you'll help your sister start her business, won't you? You have those savings for your apartment." I literally choked on my mashed potatoes. "What? Why can't she get a business loan?" I spluttered, reaching for my water glass. "There are banks that specifically help new entrepreneurs. She just needs to show them her business plan." Suddenly, the whole family started talking at once. Uncle Bob was saying something about family duty, Aunt Martha was reminiscing about how her sister had once helped her, with a much smaller amount, I'm sure, and my cousins were nodding along like bobbleheads. "Think about it, honey," Mom chimed in, her voice rising above the others. "When Linda's business takes off, she'll pay you back with interest. You'll be able to buy the most luxurious apartment in the city." They kept at it for 15 solid minutes. Every time I tried to argue, someone else would jump in with another guilt trip or emotional manipulation. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, I gave in. "Fine," I said quietly, staring down at my now cold dinner. "I'll help Linda with the money." The cheers that erupted around the table made me feel sick to my stomach. As I watched Linda accepting congratulations with that smug smile of hers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. A week after that fateful Christmas dinner, I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda. "Hey sis. Hope you haven't forgotten about your promise to help with my business. I've done all the calculations, and I need $30,000 to get started. When can you transfer it?" I stared at my phone screen for a good 5 minutes, my coffee growing cold beside me. $30,000? I had to be reading this wrong. $30,000? That's a huge amount, Linda. Why do you need so much? I typed back, my hands shaking slightly. The response came almost immediately. "I know what I'm doing, Anita. I've calculated everything super carefully. $10,000 for initial inventory, $5,000 for store deposit and first month's rent, $5,000 for renovations, $5,000 for marketing, and $5,000 for employee salaries for the first month. Plus some extra for unexpected expenses. Don't worry, I promise I'll pay you back everything within 6 months. You know me, I always keep my promises." With a heavy heart, I opened my banking app. I hit transfer, watching the numbers change on my screen. Just like that, 5 years of careful saving, of declining dinner invitations and shopping trips, of taking extra projects at work, gone in seconds. Done, I messaged Linda. The money's in your account. Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best sister ever. I'll make you proud, I promise. I put my phone face down on my desk and leaned back in my chair, memories flooding back unbidden. Like the time in high school when I needed new track shoes for the team, but Mom and Dad said they couldn't afford them, only to buy Linda a brand new iPhone the very next week because she was feeling down. Or when I wanted to take piano lessons, but they said it was too expensive, yet somehow found the money for Linda's horseback riding classes 6 months later. It wasn't just our parents either. Uncle Bob always slipped Linda extra money at family gatherings, saying she reminded him of himself when he was young. Aunt Martha would send her birthday checks twice as large as mine, because Linda was still finding her way in life. Even our cousins seemed to gravitate toward her naturally, drawn in by her outgoing personality and endless stream of dramatic stories. No matter what Linda did, lie about breaking Mom's favorite vase, borrow money from Dad's wallet, skip school to go to parties, there was always someone ready to make excuses for her. She's just spirited, they'd say. Or, she's still young, she'll grow out of it. Or my personal favorite, at least she's honest about what she wants. For example, Jenny Martinez had been my best friend. She had this beautiful leather jacket her grandmother had given her for her birthday. Linda had been jealous because Jenny's jacket was cooler than hers. I still remember exactly how everything went down. One day during lunch break, I saw Linda sneaking around near Jenny's locker. I didn't think much of it at the time, I should have. The next morning, Jenny came to school crying. Her jacket was ruined, covered in permanent marker and what looked like nail polish. I knew immediately who had done it. I'd seen the same nail polish color on Linda's dresser the night before. But before Jenny could even report what happened, Linda burst into tears in the middle of the hallway, wailing about how Jenny was going to blame her for ruining the jacket, and how Jenny had been mean to her all year. It was all lies, but Linda had always been good at crying on command. Aunt Martha got involved first. She marched into the school, demanding to speak with the principal. My niece would never do such a thing, she insisted. This other girl is clearly trying to frame her. Then Uncle Bob joined in, then our cousins, and finally our parents. They all rallied around Linda like she was some kind of victim. I sat through countless family discussions where they talked about how that Martinez girl was obviously jealous of Linda, how she was probably upset that I was spending time with my sister instead of her. I tried to speak up once, to tell them I'd seen Linda near Jenny's locker, but Mom shut me down immediately. Anita, how could you even think your sister would do something like that? Family stands together. The whole thing spiraled out of control. Our relatives kept showing up at school, complaining to teachers, confronting Jenny's parents. They made such a fuss that eventually, Jenny's mom transferred her to another school. I lost my best friend, and Linda got away with it completely. She even had the nerve to smile at me when we heard Jenny was leaving. See, she'd whispered to me in the hallway. That's what happens to people who aren't nice to me. I never told anyone what Linda said to me that day. What was the point? Nobody would have believed me anyway. Linda was the baby of the family, the one who could do no wrong, the one everyone rushed to protect. Now, over 15 years later, I found myself hoping things would be different. Maybe Linda had grown up. Maybe this business venture would be the thing that finally made her take responsibility for her actions. Maybe she'd prove everyone right about her potential. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of deadlines and meetings. I was leading a major software implementation project at work, which kept me too busy to think much about Linda's business venture. One Sunday, I stopped by my parents' house for our usual family dinner. Dad was watching baseball, and Mom was pulling a lasagna out of the oven, but Linda was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Linda?" I asked, helping Mom set the table. "Is she running late again?" Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, she's away on a trip." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. A trip? What do you mean, a trip? She's supposed to be starting a business. Don't take that tone with me, Anita, Mom snapped, her eyes narrowing. Obviously, it's a business trip. And frankly, you need to stop poking your nose into your sister's affairs. She knows what she's doing. I bit my tongue and finished setting the table in silence, but something didn't feel right. That night, lying in bed in my apartment, I opened Instagram and started scrolling through Linda's profile. My stomach dropped. There she was, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Sipping cappuccino at a cafe in Rome. Shopping in Milan. Living it up at a beach club in Greece. Each photo was more extravagant than the last, all posted within the past week. What the hell? I muttered to myself. If she's starting a clothing business with Chinese suppliers, why is she gallivanting around Europe? I barely slept that night, and as soon as I saw Linda had posted she was back home, I called her. Hey sis. Her voice was chirpy, like nothing was wrong. How are you? How was your trip? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She laughed that carefree laugh of hers. Oh my God, it was amazing. Don't worry, I totally thought everything through. I actually met with this incredible clothing supplier in Europe. They're going to be perfect for the business. European suppliers? I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice anymore. I thought you were importing from China. That was your whole business plan. Plans change, Anita. You need to be flexible in business. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Right, I took a deep breath. So, when can I see the store? You know, the one you said you'd already found? There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long. Oh, give me a week to get everything set up. I'll show you then, I promise. Something in her voice made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay calm. Fine, 1 week. I want to see this store of yours. Of course, no problem at all. I'll text you the address. The address Linda sent me was in a small shopping center on the outskirts of town. When I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted my parents' car already there. Of course they were here. Linda never did anything without her cheerleading squad. The space was small, but admittedly well arranged. Racks of clothing lined the walls, a few mannequins wore trendy outfits, and there was even a cozy sitting area with a coffee machine in the corner. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Isn't it amazing? Linda twirled around the store. Look at these pieces I got from my supplier. She gestured to a rack of dresses. And over here will be the accessories section. Oh, and I'm thinking of putting a makeup counter right here. Mom wiped away what looked suspiciously like tears of joy. My baby, a real businesswoman. I always knew you had it in you, sweetheart. Unlike some people, she added, giving me a pointed look, Linda isn't content to just work for others. She's making her own way in the world. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. $30,000 of my money had made this own way possible, but heaven forbid anyone acknowledge that. When are you opening? I asked, running my hand along a rack of sweaters. They were nice, really nice. Designer labels, quality fabric. Not exactly what I'd expected from a business plan that originally involved cheap Chinese imports. Oh, soon, Linda said vaguely, quickly steering the conversation to her plans for the store window display. Over the next couple of weeks, I kept checking Linda's social media obsessively. There were plenty of posts, Linda at fancy restaurants, Linda at spa days, Linda showing off new shoes and bags, but nothing about the store. No coming soon announcements, no sneak peeks, no business updates. Not a single mention of her entrepreneurial venture. Then came another Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The moment I walked in, I knew something was up. Linda was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red and puffy, while Mom hovered over her with a box of tissues. What's wrong? I asked, though a part of me already knew where this was heading. Oh, Anita. Linda burst into fresh tears. Everything's falling apart. The supplier increased their prices, And the store needs renovations before we can open, and there are all these permits I didn't know about. I need another $20,000 or the whole business will fail before it even starts." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're kidding, right? Another 20,000? Anita," Mom gasped. "How can you be so cruel? Your sister is in crisis." "Crisis? She hasn't even opened the store yet. How about showing me some business records? Receipts? Anything?" "I can't believe you don't trust your own sister," Dad joined in, his voice heavy with disappointment. "After everything we've done for you." I looked around the kitchen, at my crying sister, my tearful mother, my disapproving father. This was a scene I'd witnessed 1,000 times growing up, and I knew exactly how it would end. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Another $20,000. Gone in seconds. More than half my savings now transferred to Linda's account. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Linda's tears miraculously dried up as she hugged me. "You're the best sister ever. I promise you won't regret this." 2 weeks after I handed over the second installment of money, I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when I saw it. My hand froze mid-bite of my sandwich. There was Linda, posing in what looked like a doctor's office, her face showing obvious signs of recent plastic surgery. The caption beneath the photo read, "The best investment is an investment in your appearance. New me, transformation, self-love." My sandwich hit the desk. $50,000. $50,000 of my money, and there was my sister, fresh from what looked like a nose job and God knows what else, bragging about investments on social media. I scrolled frantically through her other recent posts. Designer shopping bags in Dubai. Sunset yoga in Bali. Cocktails in Singapore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I needed proof, real, solid proof that she had scammed me. Without it, I knew exactly how this would play out. Linda would cry, my parents would defend her, and I'd be painted as the jealous, unsupportive sister again. It took me 3 hours of research to find David Chen, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases. His fee wasn't cheap, but I was way past caring about money at this point. "I need to know exactly what my sister did with $50,000 she claimed was for starting a business," I told him during our first meeting. "Every transaction, every trip, every purchase. Everything." Those were the longest 3 weeks of my life. I could barely sleep, barely eat. Every time my phone buzzed with a new social media notification from Linda, my stomach churned. Finally, David called me to his office. He had a thick folder waiting on his desk. "Your sister never intended to start a business," he said without preamble, opening the folder. "I've traced every dollar you transferred to her account. Would you like to see where your money went?" I nodded, and he began laying out documents one by one. Bank statements, credit card receipts, travel itineraries, medical bills. 20,000 went to cosmetic procedures, primarily nose reshaping and lip augmentation. Another 15,000 was spent on international travel. I'd documented trips to 7 countries in the past 2 months. The remaining money went to shopping sprees, luxury hotels, and restaurant bills. I felt sick. And the store? The one she showed us? David pulled out a rental agreement. "Rented for 1 day only, specifically the day she showed it to you. The clothing was also rented, by the way. Everything was returned the next day." He pushed the folder toward me. "I've compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Bank records, rental agreements, medical bills, travel documentation, it's all here. Your sister perpetrated a deliberate fraud." I sat there for a long time, staring at the stack of evidence. $50,000. My dream of owning my own home. All gone so Linda could get a new nose and take selfies around the world. I could hear laughter from inside my parents' house as I walked up the driveway. Of course, it was Thursday afternoon, which meant the usual family tea gathering. Perfect. Let them all be here for this. The folder felt heavy in my hands as I pushed open the front door without knocking. They were all there in the living room, Aunt Martha with her usual gossip, Uncle Bob in his favorite armchair, my cousins scattered around with their phones, Mom serving tea, Dad reading his newspaper, and Linda, the center of attention as always, showing everyone something on her phone. "Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "When are you planning to pay back my $50,000? The room went quiet. Linda looked up, flashing that sweet smile that had gotten her out of trouble so many times before. "Oh, Anita, you know I can't right now. All the money is tied up in the business. Taking it out would ruin everything I built. You understand, right?" "Built?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean like that nose job you built? Or those trips to Europe, Dubai, and Bali you built?" Linda's smile faltered. Mom stepped forward, frowning. "Anita, what are you talking about?" I opened the folder and started laying out documents on the coffee table. "There is no business. Here's the receipt for your plastic surgery. Here are your travel bookings. Oh, and here's my personal favorite, the one-day rental agreement for that fake store you showed us." Aunt Martha gasped. Uncle Bob leaned forward in his chair. My cousins finally looked up from their phones. "Anita," Dad said slowly, "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Linda's just taking her time to set things up properly. She spent my money on vacations and a new face." I was shouting now. "Look at the evidence. I hired a private investigator. It's all here." "You spied on your own sister?" Aunt Martha clutched her chest. "How could you do something so underhanded?" "Underhanded?" I spun to face her. "She stole $50,000 from me, and I'm the one who's underhanded?" "Fine. If none of you want to see the truth, I'll let a judge see it. I'm suing her for fraud." The room erupted. Linda started screaming that I couldn't do this to her. Uncle Bob was yelling about family loyalty. My cousins were all talking at once. Dad was demanding I sit down and be reasonable. "You can't sue," Mom said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chaos. She smiled, and I recognized that smile. It was the same one Linda used when she thought she had the upper hand. "You have no proof Linda borrowed that money. What are you going to tell the judge? That you gave your sister $50,000 as a gift and now you want it back? Your father and I certainly won't testify that it was a loan." For the first time since I walked in, I smiled. I pulled out my phone, opened my messaging app, and held it up. "You mean like these messages where Linda specifically asks to borrow money for her business? Where she promises, in writing, to pay me back within 6 months? Those kinds of messages?" Without another word, I gathered up my evidence and walked out, leaving the door open behind me. I could hear them all starting to shout again as I walked to my car, but I didn't look back. I'd expected the trial to be long and messy, but the evidence was too solid to dispute. But it was Mr. Rodriguez, the store owner, who delivered the final blow. "Yes, she rented the space for one day," he testified. "She said it was for a prank video she was making for her family. She brought in racks of clothes in the morning and took everything out that same night. I thought it was strange, but she paid well for the day." I watched Linda's face as he spoke. For once, she wasn't crying or playing the victim. She just sat there, staring at her perfectly manicured nails, as though this was all beneath her somehow. Mom and Dad tried their best to defend her. Mom took the stand and spun a tale about Linda's entrepreneurial spirit and how she just needed more time to get the business going. Dad talked about how I was just jealous of my sister's creative business approach. But they couldn't explain away the evidence. The messages where Linda promised to repay the loan. The bank statements showing how she'd spent the money. The rental agreement for the fake store. The travel receipts, the medical bills. When the judge delivered her verdict, her voice was firm and clear. "The evidence shows clear intent to defraud," she said. "The defendant, Linda Mitchell, is ordered to repay the full amount of $50,000, plus an additional $20,000 in punitive damages for emotional distress and the costs incurred in investigating this fraud." Linda finally burst into tears then, but for once, they didn't work. I later heard through a former cousin, amazing how quickly former becomes necessary with family, that my parents had to take out a loan to help Linda pay me back. The money arrived in my account exactly as ordered. The next day, I signed the papers for my new apartment. It wasn't the one I'd originally been saving for. That dream had to be scaled back after spending money on lawyers and investigators, but it was mine. Every square foot of it was mine. My parents still call sometimes, leaving voicemails about how I've destroyed the family and broken your sister's heart. Aunt Martha apparently tells anyone who'll listen about how I turned on my own blood. Uncle Bob has written me out of his will. My cousins have blocked me on social media. They all see me as the villain in this story. The cruel, heartless sister who took poor Linda to court. The ungrateful daughter who embarrassed her family in public. The bitter woman who couldn't handle her sister's success. But you know what? Standing in my new apartment, watching the sunset through windows I own, I couldn't care less what they think.
I demolished your family home, you know? I was stunned and couldn't even speak at my husband's sudden declaration. My father had recently passed away, and I had inherited our family home and land. My husband had often expressed his desire to demolish my childhood home and build a two-family house, and it seemed he had finally resorted to extreme measures. I was devastated as my childhood home, filled with family memories, was destroyed, and I protested against him in tears, but he just grinned mockingly. Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I was able to clear the land. My name is Kate. I'm currently 27 years old and live with my husband, Matt, who is 3 years older than me. We don't have children yet. Before getting married, I lived with my father and focused on my job. My mother passed away when I was in high school, and since then, my father and I had supported each other. I had planned to work right after graduating high school, and I followed through by getting a job at a local company. I am still with the same company even after getting married. The work environment has been good since I joined, and I find my daily tasks rewarding. Matt has a somewhat unreliable side, but he has always been kind to me, helping with housework when he has time. So I have no complaints about our married life. However, my only concern is that I don't get along well with Matt's parents. At the beginning of our marriage, I wanted to get along with them as my in-laws. But it seemed they didn't think highly of me. They always treated me coldly, which only widened the distance between us. Gradually, I grew tired of interacting with them, and now try to deal with them without causing any waves. Thankfully, we don't live together, and I don't see them often. If we lived under the same roof, I might have collapsed from stress by now. Fortunately, my father lived in the same city, which was a source of strength for me, while the relationship with my in-laws was my only troubling issue. I thought we could continue our married life peacefully without any major conflicts. However, just recently, my father collapsed from an acute myocardial infarction and passed away. I was deeply shocked by the sudden loss of my beloved father. And after the funeral, I visited our family home multiple times to cry alone. But considering my job and life with Matt, I couldn't stay down forever, and I had just started to recover. With my father's passing, I inherited the family home and land, which no longer had anyone living in it. My mother was already gone, and since I have no siblings, the inheritance naturally fell to me as his daughter. Since I completed the inheritance procedures for the land, I've had more opportunities to discuss with Matt what to do about my family home. My father had once said to me, "You know, Kate, once I'm gone, you can do whatever you want with this house and land." In other words, the decision about the empty house was left to me. That house is a precious place where I lived with my family, filled with many memories. So, I have no intention of selling the land or demolishing the house for now. Although I have to pay property taxes, I want to honor my father and mother by sometimes cleaning the house and immersing myself in family memories. For that reason, my plan is to maintain the status quo for a while. However, Matt had a different opinion. When I acquired the assets, he seemed overly excited as if it was his own. It would be a waste to maintain the status quo. Since you've got a great piece of land, we should make effective use of it right away. Matt wanted to utilize the land where my family home stood as soon as possible. And our opinions were split right down the middle. Indeed, the house is located a reasonable distance from the station. And there are large supermarkets and other facilities nearby, making it a desirable location. However, the building itself is old and has many areas in disrepair since it was built before I was born. When we eventually have children, renovating the family home could be one option. Still, I simply could not accept Matt's opinion. This was because Matt was trying to push the discussion forward, as if the house belonged to him, despite it being my family home. Furthermore, my in-laws, who caught wind of the house situation, were similarly involved. They often spoke as if we would all move to that land, making me feel like an outsider in the discussions as the heir. Seeing Matt and my in-laws so delighted, I felt a sense of crisis that my family home would be taken advantage of. So, I repeatedly emphasized to Matt, that house and land belong to me, not to you or your parents. So don't go ahead and make plans without me. However, Matt just brushed me off, saying, I know that. Kate, you worry too much. He never took me seriously. I had thought he was a gentle person despite being somewhat unreliable, but the moment I received my father's inheritance, his demeanor changed, and he hardly listened to me during our discussions. Because of this, I began to distrust Matt for the first time. And that feeling only grew with time. Amidst this situation, we came to a certain holiday. That day, Matt said he was going to his parents' house and left early in the morning. I was busy with household chores that I hadn't managed to finish during the week. However, less than an hour later, Matt returned with his parents. So I had to interrupt my chores to greet them. They might be good parents in Matt's eyes. But given the situation with my family home, I still found it difficult to engage with them. Susan and Steve, what brings you here today? I hadn't heard anything from Matt about his parents' visit. And it was unusual for them to come over together without any prior notice. So I felt a bad premonition. I thought it was time to properly conclude what to do with Kate's family home. So, I brought my father and mother along. Matt answered with a broad smile to my question. My bad feeling had come true, and I felt my mood sink. What do you mean by what to do? I told you several times that I want to leave the house as it is. When I firmly stated this, Matt immediately countered. I've said it's a waste too many times. So, I'm thinking of demolishing your family home and building a new two-family house on that land. Then we can all live under the same roof. Huh? I was taken aback by such an outrageous statement. But I quickly raised my objections. What are you talking about? There's no way I can agree to that. Didn't I tell you not to proceed without my consent? Even as I desperately opposed, Matt and my in-laws just looked at me with exasperated eyes. Eventually, my father-in-law sighed and opened his mouth, sounding annoyed. It's a shame to leave such good land unused. Why don't you start taking Matt's plans seriously? A wife should obey her husband. I couldn't say that Matt had never seriously listened to me. My in-laws care deeply for Matt, so they naturally side with their own son. Moreover, my father-in-law is quite rigid and holds strong beliefs in male superiority, thinking that a wife should naturally obey her husband. If I dared to oppose Matt in front of my father-in-law, he would surely yell, "How dare you speak to your husband like that?" That's right, Kate. We're already getting older. And we don't know when we might need care. It's better to think about the future and live together in a two-family house. We would feel secure living with you and Matt, my mother-in-law interjected next. While she spoke in a gentle tone, I felt that my mother-in-law just wanted to shift all the bothersome housework onto me by living together. Right now, she was acting like a devoted wife, smiling gracefully next to my father-in-law, but when he was not around, her tone toward me would become much more sarcastic. Whenever I visited my in-laws and found myself alone with her, she would meddle with unnecessary comments about when I would have children, or hurry me to show her my future grandchild. She would also use her age as an excuse to dump all the household chores on me. If I refused, she would insist, "Isn't it only natural to respect your elders? What kind of family environment did you grow up in that you can't even do something so simple?" I couldn't even imagine living in the same house with my in-laws, who constantly treated me with such sarcasm. That house is a precious home filled with memories of my parents and me. I have no intention of demolishing it. Please, just leave it alone for now. I was firm in my stance. However, it seemed that Matt and my in-laws were not willing to give up. Honestly, what a stubborn daughter-in-law you are. Given the future, it's clearly better to build a two-family house and live together. Your parents are gone now, so you should devote yourself to us. I couldn't help but scowl at my mother-in-law's dismissive remark about my parents. But I managed to hold it together. In the end, that day ended without any real discussion. Just everyone clashing opinions, and my in-laws left with displeased expressions. After that, Matt and I continued to clash over the family home and land. Our current house is small, and we should build a larger one for when we have children, right? Matt refused to back down from his insistence on building a two-family home. I could speculate that he just wanted to live in a spacious house with his beloved parents under the guise of wanting to prepare for children. While I understood the desire to live with one's biological parents in the future, I never nodded in agreement. I was convinced that living with my in-laws would only lead to more conflicts. Therefore, regardless of demolishing the family home, I had resolutely rejected any discussions about constructing a two-family house every time it came up. As a result, Matt would invariably become displeased. As these days went on, our relationship gradually became strained, and time passed without any progress in our discussions. In the meantime, whenever I had the chance, I would visit my family home to clean and pay respects to my parents' portraits. However, I entered a busy period at work and became unable to visit my family home for about a month. Because of this, I decided to bring my parents' portraits to my current home and display them in my room during this hectic period. I hadn't told Matt about this, as our conversations had recently escalated into arguments. So I thought it best to keep it to myself. Little did I know, I would soon be reminded that it was a good thing. I had brought at least the portraits from my family home. This incident occurred shortly after the busy period ended on a holiday. I had thought I would finally have a chance to relax, but that morning, My in-laws unexpectedly showed up at my house. Since I had been busy, I hadn't seen them since we discussed the family home. They arrived without prior notice. And Matt hadn't mentioned that his parents were coming. For some reason, they were both in high spirits, looking at me while laughing with Matt. Today, we have an important matter to discuss with you, Kate. When my mother-in-law said this with a big smile, I sensed that the conversation would likely be something unpleasant. What do you want to talk about? When I asked, Matt stepped in front of me and said, I already demolished your family home. I was left speechless in shock. I thought it might be a cruel joke. But from the triumphant smiles on Matt and my in-laws' faces, I realized it was true. What? How could you do something so selfish? Even as I rushed toward him in panic, Matt just smirked at me with an air of confidence. He had taken it upon himself to demolish my family home and land without my permission. Due to the busy period at work, I hadn't been able to check on my family home for the past month. It seemed that Matt had seized that opportunity. Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I managed to clear the land, he said, feigning exhaustion. He had hesitated to pay for the demolition costs, and instead borrowed heavy machinery from his father, demolishing the house himself. In fact, my father-in-law owned a small factory and had several pieces of heavy equipment. He had likely lent the machinery to help his son without considering the consequences. Why would you do something like that without asking? I've been opposed to the demolition this whole time, haven't I? I couldn't tolerate the terrible actions of Matt and the others. Pleading with a trembling voice. My family home still contained many of my parents' belongings, and there were mementos like childhood family albums. The only thing that remained safe was my parents' portraits, which I had brought home with me. Everything else had been removed along with the rubble, and it felt like a nightmare. How could you be so cruel? I will never forgive you. I had reached my limit. Even as I glared at Matt, the three of them maintained their smug expressions. You've been so indecisive for too long, so I made the first move. We can't keep waiting for you to change your mind. Matt had an arrogant attitude, as if he had done the right thing. He continued, so, I took the land from your family home. His triumphant tone made me feel my anger shifting to disbelief. I could feel the love I had left for Matt quickly fading away. It seemed neither Matt nor my in-laws understood the gravity of their actions, and I let out a deep sigh. What are you saying? When did I ever agree to give you that land? I didn't even complete any paperwork, so it still belongs to me. It appeared that Matt didn't fully grasp the meaning of my words, looking puzzled, while my in-laws wore similar confused expressions. Since the registration process for the change of ownership had not been carried out, I had no recollection of transferring my family home or land to Matt. Therefore, the act of demolishing someone else's home without permission was, of course, a crime. You may not realize it since you didn't go through a contractor, but what you did is punishable by law. At that moment, Matt's expression hardened. Had he hired a demolition contractor, he might have known the consequences. I had no intention of going easy on him just because we were married, so I continued. Moreover, using heavy machinery on someone else's land without permission is a crime, even if it belonged to your father's company. I will be pressing charges. Previously, I had researched the legal implications regarding real estate crimes in case of any issues arising from the land I inherited from my father. I never imagined that Matt would actually resort to such extreme measures. When I mentioned the heavy machinery, my father-in-law, who had maintained a calm demeanor until then, suddenly raised his voice. Wait a minute. You two are married, so Kate's land is effectively Matt's too. Therefore, demolishing that house shouldn't be a crime. I've said it before, but the owner of that house is me, not Matt. Furthermore, I didn't agree to the demolition, nor was I even informed about it. What he did was a clear criminal act, so I will report this to the police. I can't just stand by while my cherished home is destroyed. When I replied calmly, my father-in-law was left speechless. It seemed he had taken this matter lightly. Although he lent his equipment to demolish the house, he hadn't considered that I, as Matt's wife, would think of reporting him. He likely thought he could make excuses after clearing the land. You're going to report Matt? You're his wife. There's no way you would actually do something so terrible. In place of my silent father-in-law, my mother-in-law shouted in a panic. You are the ones who are terrible for demolishing someone else's house without permission. This isn't something that can be excused just because you're husband and wife. After replying, I operated my smartphone and thrust the search results in front of Matt. The screen displayed the legal implications of the crime he had committed. What you did constitutes property destruction. It's a crime that carries a prison sentence without a fine, so you're definitely going to jail. Jail. My father-in-law raised his voice in panic, and my mother-in-law let out a short scream. Wait. Don't call the police. Think it over, we're married, right? Matt clung to my arm with a pale face. However, I shook off his hand firmly, saying, Stop using our marriage as a shield. You destroyed my family home and all my memories. Then I stated, I'm going to call the police now, and decided right then to report them. It seemed that Matt finally realized the irreversible mistake he had made. Am I going to be arrested? Me? No way, that can't be true. He mumbled in a tremble, and eventually, he foamed at the mouth and collapsed right in front of me. Afterward, Matt was arrested, and I moved out of the house we had shared and rented an apartment near where my family home had stood. I intended to get a divorce immediately, but since Matt refused, the discussions through our lawyers became prolonged. As a result, I was starting to consider filing for mediation at the family court. In the meantime, I was gathering information about Matt through lawyers and private investigators. What I discovered was that Matt had been frequenting strip clubs for years and had secret debts. He had apparently had his eye on the substantial inheritance I was to receive from my father, believing that if I came into a large sum of money, he could pay off all his debts. When I learned the truth, I was speechless with disbelief. Matt had told his parents about his debts, and shockingly, they had agreed to be co-signers for him. I could easily picture my in-laws immediately agreeing to help him, out of love for their son. Since Matt's arrest, it seemed his parents had been cleaning up after him regarding his debts. One day, I suddenly received a phone call from my mother-in-law. Kate, help me. The urgency in her voice was palpable. It turned out she was asking me to lend her money outright. Apparently, they were being pressured to repay Matt's debts, and they were struggling financially. Kate, you have your father's inheritance, right? Please share some of that money with us, she said shamelessly. I couldn't bring myself to take her seriously and replied curtly, That's not possible. Please manage it on your own, before hanging up. However, anticipating another call, I decided to block my in-laws' phone number. Since I hadn't given them my new apartment address, they probably wouldn't show up at my home. I no longer wanted to be involved with them or Matt ever again. The phone call from my mother-in-law intensified my desire to cut ties with Matt. and I decided to file for mediation for a divorce. Eventually, the mediation was successful, and we got divorced. Afterward, my in-laws lost everything, including their home, and my father-in-law's factory, and were left to repay their debts. They reportedly moved to a small apartment in the countryside and were living modestly. Years later, Matt completed his prison sentence, but found it difficult to get a job due to his criminal record. He seemed to have been arrested again for committing petty crimes like shoplifting. After my divorce from Matt, I was able to live comfortably by renting out the land he had cleared. With the inheritance my father left me, I would not have trouble living alone in the future. And I planned to continue working for a long time. Now that I was free from Matt and my in-laws, I felt I could work with renewed vigor. I hadn't thought about remarriage yet, so for the time being, I intended to enjoy my carefree single life while focusing on my job. Go home now. In the bridal waiting room, as I wished my daughter well on her marriage, she abruptly told me to leave. Her expression was far from what one would expect from a bride in her wedding dress, and I was baffled. With a disgruntled twist of her face, she said, "I don't need you in my life anymore," further deepening my confusion. Had I done something to warrant such a statement from her? "You're as good as dead to me, so just disappear." Her previously sulky expression twisted into a malicious grin. It seemed she had hidden my existence from her fiancé because she was ashamed of me. I never intended to live a life that would bring shame. But my daughter lined up numerous complaints against me, blaming me, although her accusations were merely selfish presumptions. Pointing this out now wouldn't make her understand. I decided to fulfill the bride's wishes. "Yes, I understand. If my daughter doesn't need me, then it's fine." As per her wishes, I decided to keep my distance from her from now on. With that resolution, I left the venue. However, 3 hours later, she called me. I initially ignored the calls, but they were so persistent that I finally answered. She sounded desperate. "Come back to the venue right now. I am Grace." At 55, after divorcing my husband 25 years ago, I've been managing both work and raising children on my own. The reason for the divorce might sound cliché: my husband's affair. At the time, our son, Aaron, was 10, and Hannah was just 5. I struggled with the idea of taking their father away from them. However, my husband refused even to discuss it and left us with just a divorce application. I felt guilty toward the children, but continuing the marriage wasn't possible without considering them, since their father left without a second thought. Whether divorced or not, having an absent father would be the same. Hannah felt a bit lonely without her father, but after a month, she stopped mentioning him. Aaron was actually relieved about the divorce. Apparently, my husband had introduced his mistress to Aaron, thinking he would understand because they were both men. Aaron expressed his disgust toward his father. Aaron is now a lawyer, having been driven by his disdain for his father to help those suffering from infidelity. This year, after a decade with a law firm, he quit and just opened his own small practice. Hannah works in medical administration at a major hospital in the next town. Since graduating from vocational school, she's been living on her own and seldom visits home. While I feel a bit lonely, I'm happy knowing she's doing well. Now that the children are grown and independent, I'm enjoying living alone, often taking shortcuts in household chores. I sometimes settle for delivery or ready-made meals for dinner, and enjoy drinking alone the night before a holiday. One day, Aaron visited and brought me some pleasant news, although it wasn't about him. Surprisingly, Hannah was getting married. I felt a bit upset not hearing it from her directly, but it was undoubtedly good news. I asked Aaron about her fiancé, and he was astonished that I knew nothing. He seemed frustrated with Hannah. Hannah has always been negligent. She'd remember things she needed for school at the last minute, or bring up assignments past their deadlines. Probably, she either forgot to tell me or assumed Aaron would. Aaron sighed as he shared what he knew. Hannah's fiancé is a surgeon at the hospital where she works. They've been dating for 2 years. Given her track record of short-lived relationships, I was surprised that she managed to maintain one for so long. Aaron laughed, suggesting she must be serious this time. After Aaron left, I tried calling Hannah to learn more. But she didn't answer, nor did she call back. Getting through to her is rare, maybe once in 10 tries. But I needed more details. Her fiancé might come for a greeting, and there could be a meeting with both families. If her fiancé were visiting, I'd need to clean the house. And if I were meeting her future in-laws, I'd want to dress appropriately. I tried contacting Hannah several times, but she never picked up. Usually, she only calls during Easter or Christmas to ask about meals, or when she needs money due to financial hardships. She'd come home for holidays if her favorite dishes were prepared, but otherwise, she wouldn't. When she asked for money, I suggested she move back home if things were tough, but she'd refuse and just ask for a money transfer instead. She didn't want advice, just financial help. Hannah works in the town next door. Commuting from home would be financially smarter. But she refuses, so I occasionally help her to ensure she doesn't struggle to eat. Assuming she wouldn't want to hear any nagging, she probably didn't answer my calls. Reluctantly, I reached out to Aaron again. According to him, her fiancé's parents were busy working abroad and wouldn't be back until the wedding day. So there wouldn't be a formal meeting between the families. They planned to handle the greetings on the wedding day itself. Aaron suggested they should at least greet each other beforehand, but Hannah stubbornly refused. She insisted that the wedding was their own affair, and they'd marry regardless of any objections, so greeting on the day would suffice. I could understand her point, but knowing each other as soon-to-be relatives seemed important. Maybe my thinking is outdated? On the day of Hannah's wedding, I hadn't received any communication or invitation from her. But knowing the venue and date, I dressed in a formal dress to celebrate her. Probably, in her typical negligent manner, she thought Aaron had informed me and didn't send an invite. Maybe she planned to but forgot. I had some reservations about whether Hannah could manage being a surgeon's wife. But today was her big day, and I intended to celebrate without any criticisms. When I arrived, I wasn't sure where the bridal room was due to the multiple weddings and the crowded lobby. If Hannah had informed me, I wouldn't have troubled the busy staff. After the staff guided me to the bridal room, I thanked them and knocked on the door. Hearing Hannah's voice, I opened it. She was already dressed in her wedding gown, looking so beautiful in the mirror that I almost cried with joy. "Congratulations on your big day." As I spoke, Hannah's face contorted. I couldn't understand why she looked so displeased on what should have been a happy day. Perhaps she had some anxiety about the marriage, or was worried about getting along with her future in-laws. Pre-wedding greetings and family meetings would have eased such concerns, I thought. But today was her special day, and I didn't want to lecture her. I tried to reassure her with a smile and approached her. But she snapped, "Why did you come? You weren't invited, and forcefully pushed me away. I was shocked. I had never seen her be violent, though she was often harsh with her words. I couldn't believe she would do this, and though I hadn't received an official invitation, I couldn't grasp that she hadn't invited her own mother. Go home now. My daughter glared at me and said. Her expression was far from what one would expect from a bride in her wedding dress. And I was utterly confused. When I asked her why she wanted me to leave, she twisted her face in displeasure and said, I don't need you in my life anymore. Which left me even more baffled. Had I done something to make her say such a thing? You might as well not exist in this world for me, so disappear. Her unhappy expression twisted into a sly, malicious smile. Why would you say such a lie? It's because you were such an unattractive woman that you got cheated on. And we ended up in a single-parent home, living a constrained life. My daughter answered in a rough tone. I had never intended to make my children live a deprived life. To avoid being labeled as just a single-parent family, I had actively participated in school events. I never missed celebrating important events like birthdays or Christmas. And I always gave them an appropriate amount of pocket money for their age. Although it might sound self-righteous, I managed to get both my son and daughter through college and vocational school without scholarships. This was possible because I had been working at the same company since graduating from university, holding a position that earned more than most women my age. Yet, my daughter still thinks we lived a poor life and lacked freedom. The allowance was too little, and the reason I couldn't go to the private high school I wanted was because you were the kind of woman who would get cheated on. My daughter looked resentful, thinking that if both parents had been together, she wouldn't have had to feel this way. She probably thinks that if both parents had worked, we could have afforded a more affluent life. Indeed, the reason my husband left might have been partly due to my lack of appeal. But not sending my daughter to the private high school wasn't because of financial issues. If she had a genuine desire to study something specific at that school, I would have sent her even if it had been a struggle. However, her only reason for wanting to go there was because she liked the uniform, so I simply didn't allow it. I was at a loss for words, never having imagined that she would blame our financial situation. Thinking I was cornered by my silence, my daughter attacked me with a triumphant look. I've worked hard not to end up like you, living a poor life, and making sure I wouldn't be the kind of woman who gets cheated on. From middle school, my daughter had put a lot of effort into her appearance, and she was quite pretty. Unlike me, who only wore simple makeup, she was very skilled at it. She had boasted about never being without a boyfriend. My daughter believed that I was cheated on because I lacked attractiveness. And she has always seemed to think that appearance is everything, despite my efforts to teach her that it's what's inside that counts. She never seemed to understand. People judge by appearances. Thanks to my beauty, I can marry someone high-spec. She snorted with pride. Since I'm marrying a doctor, if it comes out that I was raised in a poor single-parent home, the engagement might be called off. Just go home. But won't your fiancé find it strange that your mother isn't at the wedding? As my daughter continued to insist I leave, I posed a sensible question. She replied, that's fine. It'd be more suspicious if you were here. It seems my daughter has also lied to her fiancé and his family, claiming her parents died in an accident when she was in middle school. She told them that she and her brother supported each other using their parents' inheritance and that she was able to graduate from vocational school thanks to her brother's success as a lawyer. Moreover, she set herself up as a diligent girl who struggled to balance study and part-time jobs for her future. In reality, my daughter has never worked a part-time job. She hung out with friends almost every day after school, and her grades were below average. It's astounding how she could come up with such fabrications. Doesn't she think her lies will be discovered, or is she confident they won't be? I think such lies are easily uncovered. Also, she seems to think that me being cheated on and divorced is shameful. But I've never lived in a way that I consider disgraceful. Every complaint my daughter made was her own selfish belief or whim. But even if I point this out now, she would likely just get angry and not listen. Since today is her wedding day, I'll respect the bride's wishes. Yes, I understand. If my daughter doesn't need me, then so be it. As she wishes, I'll no longer involve myself with her. With that decision in my heart, I left the venue. While I was on my way home in a taxi, my son called. When he asked where I was, I honestly told him I was on my way back. What? Hannah's ceremony is about to start. He was very surprised. But when I explained what my daughter had said, he became furious. I'm not attending my ungrateful sister's wedding either. He said that and hung up. I don't know if he really went back, but that's for him to decide. When I arrived home, I changed out of my formal dress into something more comfortable and decided to relax. I had cleared my schedule for the wedding, so it looked like I could take it easy today. I poured some tea into my favorite mug and settled down to relax. About 3 hours after I got home, my daughter called. She had dismissed me as unnecessary, saying she didn't need me. I was angry too. Even as a mother who cherished her, being spoken to that way was infuriating. I have emotions too. Especially now, I didn't feel calm enough to talk, so I ignored the call. But she kept calling over and over, so reluctantly, I answered. Before she even confirmed it was me, she blurted out something incredibly selfish. Come back to the venue right now. Why? The ceremony should be over by now, shouldn't it? I couldn't understand why she would insist on me coming back. After the wedding was surely over. After all, it was she who had told me to leave, so why should I return now? However, she kept begging in a near tearful voice. It seems the director of the hospital where she works noticed my absence at the reception and made a fuss about it. Unbeknownst to me, I had been invited by the groom's side. I work in medical device sales. I had been visiting the comprehensive hospital where my daughter works long before. She started working there, so I knew the director well. And the hospital was planning to sign a contract to introduce a very rare surgical robot in the USA, which the groom was going to use. That's why I had been invited to the wedding. Even without an invitation from my daughter, I could have attended because of the groom's invitation. But there was no sign of me at either the wedding or the reception. The director, noticing this, asked the venue staff to check the guest list. My name was already marked as checked in. However, even though all the hospital staff invited to the wedding searched the venue, I was nowhere to be found. The groom and the director were perplexed when a venue staff mentioned, "If it's that person, I guided her to the bridal room earlier, so I saw her leave." Now my daughter was being questioned by the groom and the director. Furthermore, the absence of her brother, who was supposed to have supported her all along, put her in a difficult situation. After being subjected to my daughter's unreasonable anger, I no longer felt like celebrating for her. However, I couldn't ignore my professional connections. Reluctantly, I decided to head back to the venue. My daughter sounded relieved and thankful. But even if I went to the venue, it wouldn't help her. If her lies were exposed, I would only tell the truth. My daughter would learn firsthand what happens when you care only about appearances and neglect your inner qualities. As I was getting ready, I received a call from my son, Aaron. It seems that my daughter, Hannah, had also called him asking for help. Although he was angry and had said he wouldn't attend the ceremony, it seemed he couldn't completely ignore his sister's plight. Aaron was waiting at a cafe near the venue, ready to attend the ceremony if Hannah apologized to me. However, as the time for the ceremony and then the reception passed, Hannah did not contact Aaron. It's unlikely that no one noticed the absence of the bride's brother. Hannah probably covered it up with some plausible lie. I sighed in exasperation at my daughter's continual lying. Aaron sounded frustrated on the phone, saying, "I don't think Hannah has any intention of apologizing. You don't need to go either, Mom." But because of my work connections, I had to go. When I told him this, Aaron said he would come to the venue with me. So we decided to meet in front of it. This time, I wore my business suit instead of the formal dress and hurried to the venue. I met Aaron in front of the venue and we proceeded to the bridal room from which I had been ousted hours earlier. Upon opening the door, unlike a few hours ago, I found Hannah out of her wedding dress and in casual clothes, along with the groom and the hospital director. I bowed to the groom and the director, apologizing for leaving after being invited. The director asked why I had suddenly left. I was told to leave by my daughter. I was just fulfilling the bride's wishes for her special day. The groom and the director, who had been told that Hannah's parents had died in an accident, looked at her suspiciously. I reintroduced myself as the bride's mother. Then, Hannah started to make excuses. "No. This person is like a relative who took care of me." But Aaron interrupted her, saying, "She's our mother who raised us single-handedly." When Aaron corrected her lie, Hannah tried to pressure him. "She was just a relative who acted like a mother, right? Right, brother?" However, Aaron did not cover for her and scolded her for lying. Then turned to the groom to apologize for missing the ceremony. It seemed Aaron and the groom were meeting for the first time. According to the groom, Hannah had said, "My brother is a successful lawyer who travels around the country, and he can't make time until the day of the wedding," and had refused a meeting between the families. That was supposed to happen before the wedding. She probably wanted to prevent the truth about me being alive from coming out through her justice-driven brother. She must have thought that on the wedding day, with all the hustle, her lies would not be uncovered. Even if there wasn't time to talk to the groom, there should have been conversations with his family. It was naive of Hannah to think she wouldn't be exposed. If she truly wanted to erase my existence, she should not have invited Aaron either. But that would break the narrative of siblings supporting each other. So she had no choice but to invite him. "What do you mean? Hannah lied to me?" The groom confronted Hannah. She excused herself by saying she thought the engagement would be called off if it was known. She was from a poor single-parent family. The director was shocked. "Poor? Who?" The director knew I was a top-performing salesperson in medical device sales, which typically pays higher than normal sales positions. I might even earn as much as the groom, who is a surgeon. The director explained and Hannah said, "But I received little allowance. And I wasn't allowed to go to the high school I wanted because it was private." The groom, looking incredulous, asked how much allowance she received. In high school, it was $50 and in vocational school, $100. But that's gone quickly when you go out with friends. And my friends had much more money. The high school Hannah attended did not prohibit part-time jobs. Her friends simply earned their own money through work, unlike her. Isn't that enough money if you add a part-time job? That it runs out quickly. The groom pointed out, and Hannah looked caught. Indeed, she had told the groom she had struggled to balance study and part-time jobs for the future. It's no wonder the groom is suspicious. Was even the part-time job a lie? I can't trust anything about Hannah anymore. The groom slumped, overwhelmed. Hannah clung to him begging for forgiveness, but he remained silent, head bowed. The director, unable to stand it, asked if there were more lies. Then, in a flash of defiance, Hannah blamed me. It's all because you were stingy. Apparently, she couldn't see that blaming me, when her lies had been exposed, would only worsen her image. I wondered how she turned out this way, when I had tried to educate her just as well as Aaron. Perhaps her education was the only thing I got wrong. Hannah had grown up just like her father, who was frivolous with appearances and spending, always ready to dip into the family budget when his salary wasn't enough. I had repeatedly cautioned her about money, when she wanted to go to a private high school and when she asked for more allowance. But it seems none of it had resonated with her. Whether I was stingy or poor, it was Hannah who decided to lie about it because she felt ashamed of me. I recognize the effort you made to be beautiful, but it's not right to adorn yourself with lies just because you lack confidence. As I pointed this out, Hannah snapped. I didn't lie because I lack confidence. I lied because I'm ashamed of you. Even so, it's wrong to pretend your mother doesn't exist. If she had simply said we didn't get along, it wouldn't have been a lie. If she hadn't piled on lies to make herself look better, she wouldn't have lost the groom's trust. I always tried to remain calm when admonishing my children, especially as they grew older, because raising my voice could lead to escalated emotions rather than a focus on the issue at hand. Surprised by my raised voice, Hannah flinched and froze. Aaron gaped in shock, and both the groom and the director voiced their disbelief, looking coldly at Hannah. Unable to bear the situation, she collapsed to her knees and started crying like a child. I thought to myself, this must be what chaos looks like. Only Hannah's crying filled the silence, and the atmosphere was stark. Then the director spoke up. This might not be the best time, but... He suddenly asked me not to cancel the contract for the surgical robot. I understood his feelings, even though it seemed an odd time to bring it up. I had worked hard to bring this rare surgical robot to the hospital where my daughter worked because of the director, unbeknownst to him. However, now that it was known my daughter was related to me, the director felt a crisis about the robot's introduction. The groom also pleaded earnestly. Even though my daughter had just been crying loudly, she seemed to realize how important the robot's introduction was from the director and groom's attitude toward me and pleaded, I'm sorry. It was all my fault, so please, just the contract with the hospital. As it was a work-related issue, I wanted to say my daughter's behavior shouldn't affect it. But this time, I had mixed personal feelings into the contract. It wasn't the director's or groom's fault. But I told them I wanted to reconsider everything once I got back to my company. The director yelled at my daughter, "What have you done?" And the groom was in shock, murmuring, "My career." I decided this was no longer just a family issue but a hospital matter. And I left the bridal room with Aaron. Later, I received a call from Hannah. She had previously dismissed me as unnecessary. I ignored the call for a while, but she kept calling, so I reluctantly answered. "Mom, it's all your fault the engagement was broken off. What are you going to do about it?" As soon as she spoke, my daughter began to blame me. Despite having explained her mistakes and apologizing once, she was still trying to pin the blame on me, which was appalling. As I remained silent, she continued to rant about her current situation. It seems she had angered the hospital director, and rumors had spread within the hospital. The male staff who had previously adored her now kept their distance. Her already strained relations with the female staff had worsened, and the whispering had increased. Hannah was using her engagement to a surgeon to boost her status and complained, "Now that the engagement's broken off, people will say that women who can marry are winners, and those who can't are losers, right? So, what group do you belong to now, huh? They'll say it's the lowest, isn't it awful?" I was ashamed of Hannah just as she had said she was of me. No matter how much she polished her appearance, without inner substance, it was meaningless. I pitied my daughter for still not understanding. This even after her engagement was called off. When would she ever realize? It's all your fault, Imam, so you need to take responsibility and take care of me for a while. I was shocked by my daughter's absurd demand. Apparently, she was planning to resign from her uncomfortable job at the hospital and return home. But coddling her now would not help her recognize her mistakes. I decided to toughen up, perhaps too late, but as they say, the mother hawk pushes her chicks off the cliff to teach them to fly. Everything you've done up to now has made you who you are. You're reaping what you sowed. My words angered my daughter, who hurled vile insults at me. But I was unyielding in my stance. Also, don't think about coming home. You tried to erase me from your life, so you should live by your words. When I told her I would not support her anymore, she flipped and spoke sweetly. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm." She seemed to find it hard to continue working and desperately wanted to quit. But living alone would be difficult if she resigned. She had come begging for money even while earning a salary, likely having saved nothing. She pleaded not to be abandoned. But coddling her would only encourage her not to reflect on her actions. Her behavior on the day of the wedding, pretending to be remorseful, and then showing no actual remorse, was a prime example. I simply told her, "You'd better try your best," and hung up. After that, she called many times, but I did not answer. Later, I learned from the director that Hannah had resigned from the hospital. I apologized for any trouble my daughter had caused him and her ex-fiancé. But the director said there was no need as the surgical robot would still be introduced as planned. It's rather I feel sorry that I couldn't help your daughter enough to prevent her resignation. The resignation was her own doing. The director didn't truly feel responsible for her resignation. When I assured him not to worry, he easily shifted the conversation to the upcoming surgical robot. Hannah, now unemployed, was struggling with her job search. She had sold most of her expensive beauty products to make ends meet. I heard from Aaron. He also refused to help her financially. She gets carried away too easily when pampered. However, he sometimes took her out for meals. During one of those meals, she reportedly acknowledged how privileged she had been. I hoped she would genuinely reflect and grow into a self-reliant adult woman. Why did you pour wine on the wedding dress? How could you ruin your sister's big day like that? Are you even a real sister? On my sister's wedding day, Mom slapped my cheek after screaming that at me. Ouch. What? Why all of a sudden? I was shocked by Mom's sudden actions and was speechless. I would never do such a thing to my dear sister's wedding dress. I tried to deny it desperately, but Mom wouldn't believe me. And even the groom started accusing me. However, a shocking truth and plot would soon come to light. My name is Kim. I'm 26 years old. I have a sister who is 3 years my junior. Her name is Amber, and we've been very close since we were children. Amber has always wanted to be a nurse, and now she's fulfilling her dream. Working as a nurse in a general hospital. Nursing is very demanding and often tough. But she finds it rewarding and wants to continue in this profession. Meanwhile, I work as a tax accountant. I've been working at the same accounting firm since graduating from university. We're both single and live at our parents' house, which is within commuting distance from our workplaces. Our father passed away a few years ago due to an illness. Since then, it's been the three of us living together. Although my mom and I don't always see eye to eye due to her spending habits, which she never seems to correct despite my repeated warnings. One day, it was decided that Amber would get married and she brought her fiancé home. Nice to meet you. I'm John Simpson, and I've been dating Amber. John is 28 years old and works at a bank. He seemed very refreshing. And I felt that Amber could be safely entrusted to him, so I heartily celebrated their union. Amber, congratulations. I'm so glad you found such a wonderful person. Thank you, Kim. Amber smiled radiantly, making me happy as if it were my own happiness. Mom also seemed happy about her marriage. With the marriage, Amber was going to move out and start a new life in a new home with John. Soon after, we received the wedding invitations. Amber had managed to reserve the wedding venue she had always dreamed of. I was also asked to give a speech, and as I prepared it, I eagerly looked forward to the wedding day. Saying there was no sadness in seeing Amber get married would be a lie. But more than that, I wanted her to be happy. I bet Amber will look beautiful in her wedding dress. I might even cry. With those thoughts, I was really looking forward to the wedding day. The day of the wedding arrived. It was a clear sunny day. As if the weather itself was blessing Amber and John. I had planned to bring a wedding board, but because of work, I was running late and brought it to the venue earlier. Then planned to give it to the newlyweds. Amber, sorry for the late wedding board. And truly, congratulations. I'm glad we could celebrate this day. Wow, what a wonderful wedding board. Thank you so much, Kim. Amber thanked me with a sparkling smile. I also extended my congratulations to John. Congratulations, John. Please take good care of Amber. However, for some reason, John slightly grimaced. Yes, thank you. I noticed John's strange expression for a moment, but it was the wedding day. And I thought he might just be nervous, so I didn't dwell on it too much. Soon, it was time for Amber and John to get ready, so I waited in the family waiting room. As the ceremony time approached, there was no call to move from the staff. Huh? The ceremony time is about to start. Maybe they're having trouble with the preparations? As I wondered, there was a loud bang. And the door was rudely opened. I turned toward the door in surprise and saw Mom standing there, pale and out of breath. Mom. What's going on? As I asked in confusion, Mom stormed up to me. Kim. Why did you pour wine on Amber's wedding dress? That's terrible. No sooner had she shouted this than she slapped my cheek hard. Ouch! What? Why all of a sudden? Caught off guard by the sudden incident, I couldn't grasp what was happening. My left cheek stung painfully where Mom had slapped me. It was the first time I had ever been slapped by someone. You're the one who poured wine on Amber's wedding dress, aren't you? Why would you do that? Mom glared at me furiously. What? What are you talking about? I would never do such a thing. I would never pour wine on my precious sister's wedding dress. I desperately denied it, but it seemed like Mom truly believed I was the culprit. In fact, Amber's wedding dress is really in such a terrible state. Feeling the blood drain from my face, I quickly followed Mom to the makeup room where Amber was. Indeed, just as Mom said, Amber's wedding dress was stained bright red. And the scent of wine was unmistakable. It was clear that someone had poured wine on her wedding dress. What is this? This is too terrible. While muttering to myself, I turned towards Amber, who stood there dumbfounded in front of her wedding dress. Amber, do you know when the wine was poured? When I asked her, she slowly opened her mouth. Yeah. I went to the restroom before changing into my dress. But when I came back, it was like this. It seems that someone did this terrible thing while Amber was in the restroom. Who could do such a thing? I began, but Mom shouted. Stop playing dumb. The culprit is Kim. Mom. I'm telling you that I didn't do it. I would never tarnish Amber's dress. Why do you think it was me? I asked Mom wearily, and then she started making an outrageous claim. I saw you sneaking into the makeup room with a bottle of wine. I was wondering what she was up to because she was acting so suspiciously. No. It's a false accusation. I didn't do it. As I vehemently denied it, John looked at me with a stern gaze. Kim. I never imagined you would do such a thing. Was your blessing for us just a lie? John, you too. How many times do I have to say I didn't do it? We can't have a wedding in this dress. We'll have to cancel it. Kim, you will take responsibility for ruining our wedding. No, that can't be. But I really didn't do it. Although John accused me harshly, I kept arguing back that I hadn't done it. Stop being so stubborn. Kim, just admit it already. And take full responsibility for ruining the wedding. Why do you insist I'm the culprit? I'm telling you I saw you entering the makeup room with wine. It has to be Kim who did it. As John and Mom continued to accuse me, Amber, who had been silent until then, seemed to realize something and shouted, Kim, run. I nodded at her words and dashed off immediately. Wait. Hold on. I could feel Mom and John chasing after me from behind. If they caught me in a deserted place, they might even resort to violence. I had already been slapped by Mom. I escaped into a control room filled with staff, waiting for Mom and John. I finally caught up. Kim, running away is useless. Mom and John caught up to me, panting heavily and glaring at me. This tragedy is all because of you, Kim. Just give up quietly and take responsibility. You'll also pay for all the wedding costs, and after you've paid. John also shouted, his face twisted into a grin. Are you still saying that? No matter what you say, I didn't do it. I firmly denied the accusations, but John, looking frustrated, declared, the wedding is cancelled. It's all your fault, Kim. The wedding venue staff tried desperately to calm down John and Mom. But they were not listening. At that moment, Amber arrived with another staff member. The staff member said, "We've heard all about the situation. There are surveillance cameras in the makeup room, so let's watch the footage together." Upon hearing this, John and Mom started to panic. What? There are surveillance cameras? No, well, there's really no need to check them, right? Right, Mom? Yes, that's right, John. We don't need to see the footage from the surveillance cameras when I saw Kim entering and leaving with the wine with my own eyes. John and Mom clumsily insisted that they didn't need to see the camera footage. Amber calmly told them, "John, Mom, let's check the surveillance cameras. I can't believe Kim would do such a thing, and I'm sure she didn't do it." Amber. It was comforting to know that Amber believed in me. "Let's all go and check the footage together. You can watch it in that room over there," the venue staff directed. Mom began to protest loudly. "Wait. Let's not after all. Everything up to now, forget it. Maybe I remembered wrong when I said I saw it. Yes, I was kind of panicking too. Sorry about that. Let's just call off the wedding for today and leave it at that." As the two of them spoke nonsense, I reached my breaking point. Don't joke around. I've been accused of ruining my dear sister's wedding dress. There's no way I can just leave it like this. I will definitely check the surveillance footage. At my shout, John and Mom flinched. Amber and I, along with the venue staff, went to check the surveillance footage. Mom and John watched us from a distance, looking uncomfortable. The footage clearly showed John pouring wine onto the wedding dress. So it was John all along. I knew it. It didn't make sense for Kim to do such a thing. And it's impossible security-wise at the venue. And yet, John and Mom kept stubbornly accusing Kim. That's. John tried to make excuses, but he was at a loss for words. And John kept demanding that Kim take responsibility for canceling the wedding, not just pay for the dress. I realized that John and Mom might have been conspiring to take money from Kim. Amber, so that's why you told me to run? Amber nodded at my question. Enraged, I confronted John and Mom. Why did you do this? Just like Amber said, were you two trying to get money from me? No, more importantly, how could you do this on what was supposed to be the brightest day of Amber's life? John then laughed defiantly, his face contorting unpleasantly. Shut up. Don't yap about it, you sisters. Just shut up. I've always been dissatisfied with Amber being just a nurse. What? Amber was shocked by his words. Being a nurse means working nights and it's incredibly busy. And the salary isn't great either. So I thought it'd be more beneficial to marry Kim, who is a tax accountant making good money. What? Stunned by his absurd reasoning, it turned out that John had discussed switching from Amber to me with Mom, who had agreed because she owed John money. They had planned this whole scheme where John would ruin Amber's wedding dress with wine, cancel the wedding, pin the blame on me, and force me to take responsibility. It's impossible for such a plan to succeed. It's too despicable. You both are out of your minds. If you were dissatisfied with Amber's profession, why didn't you discuss it before marriage instead of concocting such a plan to forcefully go through with the wedding? Disgusted, I sighed heavily. Amber, red-faced with anger, screamed at John and Mom. John, I never thought you'd be such a scumbag. And you too, Mom. How could you participate in such a plan and still call yourself a mother? John then snapped back, shut up. Just listen to me. as John began to get violent. His own parents and other relatives quickly restrained him, and the police were called. "You are annoying, Amber. You should just give me the money and take care of my parents. Don't defy me even though you're a woman." While ranting, John was taken away by the police. Naturally, the wedding was cancelled. After being grilled by the police, John had to pay a significant amount of money for the cancellation fee. Because of this, his savings were insufficient, forcing him to take on debt. Lectured by relatives and known at his workplace for the incident, John lived a restricted life. Even if he wanted to quit his job, the massive debt made it impossible. Meanwhile, Amber and I declared our disownment of Mom. Amber, Kim. I'm sorry. I was in financial trouble and had borrowed a lot from John, so I had no choice but to cooperate. Mom, both Amber and I have been sending you money, but we're cutting that off, of course. As I spoke coldly, Mom's face fell in despair, and she clung to us, crying, "Don't stop the remittances. Please. We're a blood-related family. Why would you treat me so harshly?" The one who treated one's blood-related family harshly was you. Mom. I can never forgive you. I don't ever want to see your face again. Amber shouted, but Mom kept begging, "Please don't stop the remittances." Staring at her disdainfully, Amber and I prepared to move out and left the house. We rented apartments close to each other and began our new lives. After a while, Amber started dating a sincere man from her workplace, and I started going out for meals with a fellow tax accountant from my cohort, hoping things would work out well. We have no idea about Mom's current situation and have no intention of ever getting involved with her again. We hope she reflects on what she did. Amber and I keep in touch often, enjoying peaceful and happy days together. It's terrible. It seems Mom has fallen down the stairs at home and gotten hurt. No sooner had I pressed the call button than my husband, Tony, spoke in a panicked voice. "What? That's why. Mom's been injured. I'm going to go back to my parents' house for a while to take care of her. I'm leaving the house stuff to you." I thought, my mother-in-law? But she's right in front of me. Right now, I'm happily having coffee with my mother-in-law at her house. What is Tony talking about? As I was puzzled, she gestured to me with her eyes and pressed her index finger to her lips with a shoe. I nodded okay and put my smartphone on speaker mode between my mother-in-law and me. "Hey, is it really true that Mom got hurt? Then, I'll rush over to Mom's place right now." I made sure to confirm with my mother-in-law clearly. "What? No, it's okay, it's okay. You don't get along with her, right? Leave Mom's care to me." By then, not wanting to continue the conversation any longer, Tony abruptly hung up the phone. I was dumbfounded, and my mother-in-law, who had been holding back her laughter, burst into laughter as soon as the call ended. Let's see how things go for a while. My husband, Tony, completely disinterested in me now, still doesn't know about the secret relationship between my mother-in-law and me. I could envision his pale face in the future, and I couldn't help but smile. My name is Kathy. I have been working as a caregiving assistant since graduating from high school, and I'm now in my 50s. Tony was my high school classmate, and we got married in our late 20s. In the early days of our marriage, I had a problem. It was with his mother, Dorothy. His parents' house was nearby, so I ran into her frequently at the supermarket or when taking out the trash. Naturally, I always greeted her with a smile, but she always ignored me. Having been a well-educated career woman who traveled the world in her younger days, she seemed to disdain me, a high school graduate, as unsuitable for her son. However, I later realized this was a misunderstanding. One day, Dorothy confronted me about why I frequently left home late at night. From her probing gaze, I realized she suspected infidelity. "You're always out late at night." I feel sorry for my son. "Mom, it's not like that. Actually, the elderly I care for often wander off at night, and their families ask me to help look for them, so I end up out late." When I explained the situation honestly, Dorothy blushed and sincerely apologized for her mistake. "I'm really sorry for being rude. I just assumed you were cheating." Seeing Dorothy apologize deeply, I also realized that I had misunderstood her. I shared a story that inspired me to pursue a career in caregiving, and she smiled warmly and looked at me kindly. I once escorted an elderly woman with dementia to the police station when I was a high school student. Seeing how kindly the caregiving assistant spoke to her, I decided I wanted to be a wonderful woman like that, and I chose the path of caregiving. I'm really proud to have become your mother-in-law. Now that I know Dorothy isn't the type to judge people based on education or background, we spend enjoyable times together, grabbing lunch or coffee whenever we can. But problems never cease. About 3 years into our marriage, Tony suddenly started being cold to me. I thought he must be tired from work, so I tried to keep things cheerful. "Welcome home. They're showing that movie we watched on our first date on TV today. Want to watch it together?" It had become a tradition to prepare popcorn and watch it together whenever it aired on TV. "I'm tired of it already." "Sorry, but I have work left to do." Tony avoided eye contact and disappeared into his workroom. When I passed by his room after taking a bath, I heard laughter from inside, Tony's laughter, which had become rare recently. I thought, is it an online meeting? But it sounds too fun. I tried not to think too deeply about it and went to my bedroom alone. However, by ignoring these occasional feelings of discomfort, the gap between Tony and me had grown irreparably deep. Previously, on our anniversaries and my birthdays, Tony always remembered to send flowers and gifts, but now he doesn't come home, claiming overtime, and sometimes reeks of alcohol when he does. "Why do you smell like alcohol when you said you were working overtime?" I demanded. Tony nonchalantly replied that a sudden business dinner had come up, clicking his tongue in annoyance. Gradually, our nights together dwindled, and even if I snuggled up to him in bed, Tony would twist uncomfortably and turn his back to me. "My work isn't like your squad caregiving job. I use my brain and get tired." Tony spat out without looking at me. I thought, squad? Is that what he thinks of my job? I take pride in my caregiving work. It's a fulfilling job where I can help people. And while I don't do it just for thanks, it feels good to be appreciated. However, caregiving is not all fun and games, it's mostly tough. And I'm exhausted after work, studying between work and house chores to improve my skills. As anger welled up inside me, I also felt sad to be belittled about my job. But I hated for fights to spoil the atmosphere at home, so I bit my lip and held back. I thought, Tony must just be tired, he doesn't mean it. I kept telling myself this and continued to endure. But my patience was in vain, and the situation worsened. Tony claimed to be working overtime or on business trips, and meals at home became exceedingly rare. When he did eat at home, he was distant, mechanically shoveling food into his mouth. "How's the seasoning on the turkey? Should it be stronger?" Tony didn't respond, as if he hadn't heard my voice. "Hey, listen." "What?" When I asked about the seasoning again. "Turkey?" "Oh, it doesn't matter as long as it's edible," Tony said with an indifferent face, fiddling with his phone out of my sight. Then, suddenly standing up, he said he had a call from work and left the food to lock himself in his workroom. Tony didn't come out of the room again, and I sighed, looking at the half-eaten meal he had left. It was expensive fish. I had splurged, hoping to energize him after his recent string of late nights. If he wasn't going to eat, I wished he would tell me. I wrapped the leftovers and put them in the fridge for my lunch the next day. The next day, Tony staggered home drunk at 2 a.m. I had reached my breaking point. "Hey, can't you at least let me know if you're going to be late?" It wasn't much to ask for, a simple message would have sufficed. "Some urgent work came up, and I'm tired, so stop nagging," Tony snapped, clumsily kicking off his shoes and dramatically covering his ears with his palms. "Nagging? I have to prepare meals and plan my own schedule, you know." "Plan? You're always just cooking the same stuff. Who do you think works to afford this nice house anyway?" His words, belittling me while drunk, left me speechless. This house was actually built by his mother, Dorothy, and Tony hadn't paid a penny towards it. Besides utilities, which were paid by direct debit, I covered everything else from my salary. Initially, Tony would give me some cash, but he gradually started avoiding the subject. I nearly spoke up, but bit my lip to avoid hurting Tony's pride. Tony seemed to guess what I wanted to say and glared at me, frowning deeply. His right arm moved, and I instinctively braced for a blow. But then he suddenly laughed and gave me a condescending smirk. "Well, your poor parents didn't contribute a penny, did they?" The words were as hurtful as physical violence. "What are you saying?" I was too angry to articulate my thoughts properly as he mocked the parents who had raised me lovingly. Indeed, my family wasn't wealthy, but they had offered to help, which Tony had refused. I remembered the mixed expressions of gratitude and apology on my parents' faces back then. "I'm happy just to be married to Kathy." Back then, I proudly watched Tony as he gently embraced me, thinking I had chosen the right person. Yet now, leaving me dumbfounded, he spat out, "I'm taking a bath," and stormed off to the room. From that day on, Tony started staying at a hotel more than once a week, even though he wasn't on a business trip, and he never informed me beforehand. He claimed it was a busy period at work, but this busy period had been going on for over half a year now. As usual, I was having breakfast alone in the morning when Tony called. "Hey, I'm at the station now. Bring me a change of underwear and a shirt." "What?" "I have to visit a client before I go to the office today." "I can't." "Fine, then come within 10 minutes. Tony hung up abruptly, without any regard for my schedule. Had I become more of a servant than a wife in his eyes? It was already 8 a.m. I left my breakfast, quickly packed a change of clothes in a paper bag, and ran out without even putting on makeup. My hair disheveled, I arrived at the station gasping for breath, where Tony took the paper bag without a word of thanks. "Wait here," he said arrogantly, pointing to the ground as he entered the station restroom to change. When I checked my phone, it was nearly 8:30 a.m. I had promised to be at my client's place by 9 a.m. Tony finally came out of the restroom after changing. The shirt and underwear he had been wearing were crumpled up in the paper bag he handed back to me. Tony glanced at my face, clicked his tongue, and scoffed. "At least put on some makeup, won't you?" He mocked my disheveled appearance and hurriedly walked towards the ticket gate. I thought, "It's your fault." I wanted to shout at Tony's back, but I had no time for arguments. I shook my hair again and ran to my client's house. After finishing my work and returning home, I took Tony's laundry out of the bag, and a sweet scent filled the air. At first, I thought it was the hotel soap, but the fragrance was too strong. It had to be perfume. When I told Tony about it after he came home, he visibly panicked. "Ah, that. It's just the perfume of the woman next to me on the crowded train." As he nervously rambled on about things I hadn't even asked, my suspicion only deepened. The next day, Tony came home unusually early, holding a pink paper bag. "Actually, I've been looking for a perfume that suits you recently. So maybe that's why my shirt smelled." "Why? It's not even my birthday." Confusion overtook any sense of delight, and I inadvertently frowned. "What? I can't give you something even if it's not a special day?" Ungrateful. Tony seemed displeased by my reaction, threw his bag on the sofa, and sulked. A few days later, while I was having coffee at Dorothy's house on a weekend, Tony, who had said he was working, called shortly after leaving the house. "It's terrible. It seems Mom has fallen down the stairs at home and gotten hurt." He spoke loudly, so his voice leaked from the smartphone. I thought, my mother-in-law? But she's right in front of me. As I was puzzled, Dorothy gestured with her eyes and shushed me by pressing her index finger to her lips. I placed the smartphone on speaker mode between Dorothy and myself. "Hey? Did Mom really get hurt?" I pressed Tony for clarification, wanting Dorothy to hear him clearly. "That's what I'm saying." "Then, I'll rush to the family home right now." As I said this, Tony replied in a flustered voice. "What? You don't get along with her, do you? Leave her to me. I'm going to the family home to take care of her for a while. I'm more qualified for caregiving." I said it's fine. By then, not wanting to continue the conversation, Tony hung up abruptly. Dorothy, who had been holding back her laughter, burst out laughing once the call ended. Let's see how it goes for a while. Since Dorothy suggested it, I decided to watch the situation for a while too. A week later, Tony came home to pick up some clothes. "Hey, how's Mom doing?" I pretended to be genuinely concerned and asked Tony in a nurturing tone. "Ah, the surgery went well, and she'll be discharged soon." I mercilessly pointed out the contradiction in Tony's words. "What? Weren't you supposed to be on home care?" Tony made a face that said he'd been caught and started making excuses at a rapid pace. "Yeah. That's right. He was rushed to the hospital with a sudden illness. Had surgery, and then fell and sprained his ankle during rehab at the hospital. Stupid, right? What? A sudden illness? It wasn't an injury?" I didn't ease up on my questioning. Sweat started to bead on Tony's face. Recently, he had been quite subdued, but now he looked pathetically flustered. And I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Then, the door of the next room swung open with force. "Let's hear more about that," said Dorothy, who had been waiting in the next room, crossing her arms as she appeared. Tony, caught off guard by his mother's sudden entrance, just gaped, opening and closing his mouth like a fish. "What? I thought you two didn't get along." It seemed Tony still believed that his mother and I were not on good terms. No wonder, as there had been virtually no real conversation between Tony and me for years. I had tried several times to tell Tony that any misunderstandings with Dorothy had been cleared up, and we were now like friends. It was Tony who had been avoiding conversation with me. Suddenly, Tony seemed to have an idea and exclaimed, "Ah, Mom? That was Kathy's misunderstanding." "Yeah. It was Mr. Owen, a senior colleague who slipped and severely injured himself at home." His excuse, unfit for an adult professional, made me look at him with a cold eye. Then, I casually pulled out my smartphone from my pocket and tapped the screen. "Leave Mom to me. I'm going to the family home to take care of her for a while." By then, I had recorded a phone call from Tony from a week ago, starting midway through the call. I clearly hear Mom though. Watching Tony turn pale as his big lie was exposed, Dorothy and I couldn't hold back our laughter any longer. Then Dorothy abruptly stopped laughing, furrowed her brow, and took a deep breath. Which mom have you been taking care of?" Tony, scolded by his mother, collapsed in shock. He had once told me that he had rarely been scolded by his mother. Looking up at Dorothy with teary eyes, Tony seemed just like a little child. "What? You hated Kathy too, didn't you? You always belittled her caregiving job." Tony tried to shift the blame to Dorothy in a near-crying voice. "That's because I saw Kathy leaving the house at night and suspected she was cheating. I would never belittle her caregiving work." Dorothy began to explain a connection between herself and me that Tony still didn't know about. The elderly woman I had taken to the police station in high school, which had inspired her to pursue caregiving, was actually Dorothy's mother and Tony's grandmother. When I had first visited Tony's home to formally announce our marriage, the grandmother had already passed away, so I hadn't realized who she was. "What?" Tony exclaimed in a stunned voice. "I have nothing but gratitude for Kathy. I respect such a kind-hearted person like her. I would never disdain or mock her." Though Tony had been looking meek earlier, he suddenly looked up and glared at me. "Damn it. I married you thinking that someday you'd take care of my parents. Because you work in caregiving. If not for that, why would I choose a poor high school graduate like you?" Saying this, Tony threw socks and a tie from his bag at me in a fit of childish anger. Overwhelmed by his immaturity, I was more appalled than angry. Dorothy stepped between Tony and me, shielding me. "You shouldn't judge people by their backgrounds." I stopped Dorothy from raising her hand against Tony and gestured to her to look at the time. "It's about time, Mom. This isn't the end, Tony." "Right, let's get to the main point then." Tony defiantly rolled his eyes and clicked his tongue. "Is there still more?" Just then, the doorbell rang as if on cue. "Hello from Flower Garden." A lively female voice was heard, and as I opened the front door, a young woman in her early 20s stood there holding a bouquet. I invited her inside. Confused but following along, she gasped in surprise when she saw Tony sitting on the floor. "What? Tony? Yikes!" Tony made a strangled noise upon seeing the woman's face. The florist looked back and forth between Tony and us, her expression full of suspicion. "What's going on here?" As the woman questioned Tony, he screamed as if in agony and fled into the next room, slamming and locking the door behind him. I don't know you. It's a case of mistaken identity. We are strangers to each other. From his clumsy tone, it was clear Tony was in considerable confusion. What? It's me, Alyssa. We were together just this morning. Ha. No, it's a mistake. Alyssa, who had introduced herself, called out to Tony through the door. But he had clammed up, probably cowering and covering his ears, waiting for things to cool down. Seeing my husband reduced to such a pathetic state, I was beyond anger or sadness. What do you mean? He's definitely my fiancé. What have you done to him? Alyssa's anger was directed not at the fleeing Tony, but at Dorothy and me. Actually, Dorothy and I had known about Alyssa beforehand. The day after Tony made a false call about his mother being injured, we became certain of his affair and headed to a detective agency. Evidence of Tony's infidelity was easily found, and the other party was the clerk at the florist's, where he used to buy flowers for my birthday. The detective suggested that Alyssa might not know Tony was married. She seemed happy talking to colleagues about her upcoming marriage. Dorothy and I had pondered how to convince Alyssa that Tony was married, and how to corner the argumentative Tony effectively. Yesterday, after Tony said he'd come to pick up some things, I immediately contacted Dorothy and hurriedly reserved a bouquet at the florist where Alyssa worked. Alyssa, I'm sorry to involve you in this. I am Tony's wife, Kathy. I apologized to Alyssa for involving her in the plan, and told her politely that I was Tony's wife. What? Don't lie. I'm going to marry him. Please don't interfere. Seeing Alyssa's disbelief reinforced my conviction that carrying out this plan was the right decision. Words alone wouldn't have convinced her that Tony was already married. I showed Alyssa a wedding album I had prepared on the table. She gasped sharply, hesitantly took the album, and slowly turned the pages. After returning the album to me, Alyssa bit her lip and clenched her fists, holding back tears. Suddenly, she apologized to me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Seeing such an honest and good person being deceived intensified my anger towards Tony again. Tony! Come out here. Alyssa yelled towards the room Tony had fled into, pounding on the door with her clenched fists. Despite everything, Tony continued to remain silent. Alyssa had even introduced Tony as her fiancé to her father. She mentioned that her father was pleased upon hearing the name of Tony's company, believing it was reputable. My father is the president of a client company that does business with yours. You might know it as Morris Trading. Morris Trading was a well-known major corporation. When Alyssa mentioned the company name, the door to the room Tony had escaped into burst open. What? I didn't know about this. Tony emerged pale-faced, tripped on the carpet, crawled on the floor, and clung to Alyssa's legs. Alyssa, I'm sorry. Tony grabbed her hands, spouting insincere lines like, I love you. And you're the only one for me. I was planning to divorce her when I met you. It's true. Tony jetted his chin towards me. It was clear he meant me when he said her. What? I can't believe this. I'm glad I didn't end up marrying a scumbag like you. Alyssa turned back to me. Thank you for telling me, Kathy. Alyssa, who had been standing up for me, brushed off Tony's hands as if shaking off dirt. So be it. I really wanted to marry Alyssa, but if she hates me, we'll break up. Despite the dire situation, Tony seemed relieved, as if he thought he could end it here. He was despicably cowardly. However, Alyssa's next words plunged him into despair. What? You think this is over? I will never forgive you for deceiving not just me, but my father too. I will sue for compensation. So no. Tony crawled on the floor, then clung to his mother's legs. Help me. Mom. Dorothy, like Alyssa, shook him off. I've pampered you too much, because you had no father. Hurting a young woman and the kind Kathy, this time. I must teach you a proper lesson. So, I don't have the money to pay the compensation. Tony, though well paid, had almost no savings. Recently, multiple notices from consumer loans had been frequently arriving for Tony. I had noticed that his spending had become extravagant over the years. He had custom-made expensive suits and shopped at overseas boutiques, often visiting hair salons, probably to impress the young Alyssa. Alyssa, who had been involved with such a despicable man, glared at him angrily. I will contact you through a lawyer. Don't ever show up in front of me again. Alyssa spoke firmly to Tony and nodded at me before leaving. As we watched her leave, Dorothy and I turned back to Tony. When Dorothy called his name, Tony visibly flinched. You're just like your father. His looks and his deeds. Once, Dorothy's husband, Tony's father, had cheated with a younger woman, fathered a child, and eventually abandoned the family. Dorothy and I left the lifeless shell of a man that was Tony behind, and walked out of the house. I couldn't bear to live under the same roof with Tony anymore and decided to stay with Dorothy for a while. The next day, I received a call from Alyssa. She had seen my mobile number on the flower reservation slip and decided to call. Alyssa's father had promptly called Tony's company to complain. He even threatened to terminate their business dealings. But senior executives from both companies desperately tried to calm him down. Although they managed to avoid terminating the deal, Tony was demoted and sent to a subsidiary in a rural area of Southeast Asia. Alyssa successfully sued Tony and obtained the desired compensation. Kathy, I'm truly sorry. It's only you for me, come with me. Covered in debt from alimony and credit loans, and ultimately forced to go alone to a rural area abroad, Tony, with tears and snot running down his face, grabbed my hand and pleaded for reconciliation. I have my caregiving job, so I can't follow you. Make sure you work hard and pay Alyssa the compensation. I left the divorce papers on the table, packed my things, and left the house. I didn't ask for any compensation for myself. I didn't want to burden Dorothy, and I could live well enough on my own earnings. Months later, I passed the certified caregiver exam. Dorothy, no longer my mother-in-law but still rejoicing as if it were her own success. And I continued to enjoy our chats and coffee breaks. We were bound by a deep friendship that transcended our former familial ties. Occasionally, we reflected on the past, but we both looked forward without dwelling on it, enjoying our new lives.